Welcome to the Manifestation Lab. This is your host, Kelly Howe. From the grounded science to the mystical and unseen, we're investigating this big experiment we call life and finding what really works when it comes to manifesting a life that sets your heart and your soul on fire. Welcome to the lab. Hey everyone, welcome back. It's been a little bit. I might sound a little bit raspy. I've lost my voice a couple of times, and I've had the most horrific case of poison ivy. I know that sounds dramatic. I'm very dramatic about my poison ivy experience. I had like streaks of it all over the left side of my face. I got so swollen. I was literally unrecognizable. Most of the time I had a sense of humor about it, but there was a hot minute when I was very mad about the fact that I had to cancel clients for a week because my face was so swollen and hurt so bad that I really couldn't even tap and touch on it. So I actually wanted to bring that story up before I launch into the rest of the podcast, because I think this is a really great example of how we can investigate what's going on in our current life and kind of use it as a springboard to get into the past and to process some of the old shit that we maybe didn't even know was still there. So what happened was I get this poison ivy, and in the beginning I was like, okay, no big deal, no big deal. Well, after the left side of my face got so swollen that it was like drooping down and oozing. Oh, it was so gross. But after I really swelled up and didn't look like myself, I noticed a really interesting, deep set of emotions that came up. And it was interesting. And this is kind of what I do for a living. I mean, it is what I do for a living, but it's just kind of the way my mind works anyway, is that I get really curious about why. Like, why do I feel like that? So I'm looking at it from an adult and I'm like, well, I don't look like myself. This is frustrating. I'm having to cancel plans because of this. But when I really sat with it and got into the feeling of it and asked myself, have I ever felt like this before? I was able to go back and think about a time when I was a kid, when I used to get terrible poison ivy. Oh, my poor mom. She'd take me to the doctor. There was nothing they could give me that really helped. It would be there for weeks and weeks, sometimes months. It would sometimes get infected. It was just, it was horrible. But as a kid, I started to think back, and I really haven't had a bad case of poison ivy probably since I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, maybe even younger. And when I really sat with it and looked back, I was able to notice that, wow, yes, when I was a kid, I was extremely embarrassed of this oozing part of my leg. Kids would look at me funny. Sometimes adults would even give me funny looks because it looked really gross. And with that whole situation came this sense of powerlessness, this sense of embarrassment, humiliation, frustration. And when I took myself back, I could recognize that, yes, this current thing that I was going through felt bigger and more intense because I hadn't yet processed the emotions of my past in a similar place. Now, there's a saying in neuroscience that says the neurons that fire together wire together. So this means that every time you experience something similar, we take a similar path in our neural, in our neural pathways. And the more you experience something, the stronger that wiring gets. Now, I haven't really experienced poison ivy since I was a kid. However, those pathways have been laid down. Those feelings, those emotions, that emotional charge was still in there when I recalled those memories. And it was being brought right back to the surface by what I was going through now. So we haven't talked about it as much as I would have liked, but as a transformational coach, I specialize in this technique called EFT, or tapping. I've talked about it some, but not enough. And part of the beauty of this technique is that it releases emotional charge. It also takes us through a very clinical process of looking back at old memories and really desensitizing ourselves, resetting the neural pathways, resetting the programming so that the memory is truly in the past. Now, when someone has processed a memory with a technique like EFT, or you can just call it tapping, someone can tell me, I could tell you a story about something that happened to me that might have been a 9 or a 10 charge before, maybe just a 5. But when I'm done processing it, I can tell you that same story feels 0 emotional charge and 0 physical reactivity in my body. Okay. Now that is serious empowerment. I want you to think back to all the things that you've been through in your life, big and small, that if you think about it, you still get that kind of like sick feeling in your stomach, or maybe you feel a heaviness in your chest or a tightness in your chest, or maybe you feel anxious, right? So much of our anxiety comes from past wounding that hasn't fully been processed or processed at all, because we weren't taught how to process our emotions. Our parents didn't know how to process their emotions. What we were taught was, you're fine, push it down, move on, right? That's what we did. No fault or blame. Nobody knew how to process emotions, but we can change that with our generation. We can change that with techniques like tapping. So, like I said, I used the tapping on these past memories, on these emotions that were coming up, because it didn't feel adult. It didn't, that shame, that embarrassment, it really didn't feel adult. I mean, I was really having a pretty good sense of humor about it. Now, there was a day that it wasn't so funny because I was in so much physical discomfort. But the steroid shot took care of that pretty quickly. I'm not somebody that rushes into that kind of thing either, but it was definitely a godsend in this situation. But I was able to look at the emotions that were coming up and go, okay, when have I felt like this before? And kind of sense into like, where does this feeling really come from? Where does this feeling of humiliation really come from? Because it felt so much bigger than my adult self, right? It actually felt like I was being hijacked by these emotions, because I don't, I just didn't really care that much about how I looked. I probably would have seen my clients even had my face not hurt so bad. But definitely when I was able to look at it, there was a very direct overlap. It's not always so black and white and easy to see, but you can see how the emotions from my childhood were just kind of still in there and needed to be processed. I did some inner child work. I did some tapping. I did a lot of processing, and sure enough, the emotions fell away and I was able to deal with my poison ivy in the here and now. So I wanted to bring that up because my guest today, we talk a lot about healing the throat chakra, and don't worry, I'm going to do a whole podcast on talking about chakras and how to heal wounding with tapping, and what the chakras are and all that. Because I know I'm talking about that. I'm not giving you all a lot of background. Some of you may have it and some of you may not, but we're going to do that in the future. But my guest today, Nichole Bigley, is the host of a Psychic Story podcast. We talk a lot about healing the throat chakra, healing in general. And I wanted to kind of give you that frame of reference with how you can use a day-to-day event that doesn't really feel like, this whole big thing. I mean, my poison ivy was a big, horrible kink in my schedule, but it wasn't like a life and death situation, right? But there were big emotions that came up underneath it. And my body was really bringing that to the surface so that I could process it and release it and get myself reset. And on the other side, I'm stronger and more empowered. It's a beautiful thing. I want you to just, and I'm inviting you, I guess is the way to say that, to look at your day-to-day life and get curious about the bigger emotions that are underneath there when you're sort of in judgment with yourself or telling yourself, like, I shouldn't feel like that. That's not that big of a deal. It can be the most benign thing. I actually had a really awesome and kind of hilarious session today where we were able to recognize in one of my clients that she is super triggered by spreadsheets. So what did we do? We honored that experience. She was like, I hate them. I feel contracted. My body reacts to it. Ugh, right. And I actually share that. So it was really fun for me to tap with her on that. But we honor the experience. She could have very easily been like, it's not a big deal, no big deal, dealt with like the anxiety that the spreadsheets bring up. But instead, we look at it head on. We use the tapping. We can even get playful with it and say things like, I fucking hate spreadsheets. And as ridiculous as that sounds, when you do that kind of vocalizing with the tapping, you calm your brain down, you calm your nervous system down, and holy crap, it feels so much better. The true beauty is now when she moves forward and she looks at a spreadsheet, she's going to be less triggered. So she can be more in the present moment. She knows, like I do, that spreadsheets are amazing and, help us organize our life and can be like a total game changer. But when we're in resistance to something and they're triggering us for some reason, it's taking us out of that, right? So I want you to just investigate, get curious about what's going on in your day-to-day life. Maybe try some tapping on it. And I would love for you to report back and let me know how that goes. Like I said, my guest today is Nichole Bigley. She's the host of A Psychic Story. I first met Nicole a couple of years ago when she invited me to be on the podcast. I believe it's episode 33, which is like one of my numbers that always feels like a wink from the universe. So we talk about how to use tapping with past lives and things like that. So that would be a fun one to go check out. Nicole is so much fun. You'll have to listen in on the podcast because I can't remember exactly what her offer is, but I believe it's something like if you leave a 5-star review, you get entered to win a free session with her. And she's incredible. Her gifts are really amazing. So I would definitely invite you to check out the podcast and leave that review for her. Hey, and by the way, leave a review for me if you get a chance. All right, here's Nicole. Enjoy the podcast. The thing I wanted to ask you about first was when you started your podcast, did you have resistance behind it? Because this was not an easy process for me at all.
What do you mean by resistance?
So what I mean is like, even though I was excited to do it, it's like anytime I would take steps towards it, it was like that fear would kick in. And
absolutely.
Such an emotional journey that I think naively I didn't expect, but there's been all the ups and downs with it. And I'm so glad I'm doing it. But I feel like people put their stuff out there and you never like see the behind the scenes of all the crap that we're working through behind with the tech and just, my throat chakra, Jesus. Like I went to publish a couple of months ago on one of the podcasts and my throat turned bright red. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
Okay. I think there might be some fear there or something coming up,
Okay, so let me kind of take a step back. When I first was led to even start the podcast, it came through several months of me just praying. The reason I was praying was because everything kind of collided in my world where I didn't understand why I was so unhappy. And I honestly, for lack of a better word, miserable. I had the house, the career, the car, the friends, the family, the relationships, all the things that you would think would make you fill up and be happy and just have a purpose and fulfilled. So finally, after several months, me praying and asking my guides and angels, just for the love of God, send me a sign, all the things I think we all do in a lot of ways. I was just on my way, like drifting off to sleep. And all of a sudden, like spirit and universe just came in and it said to me, you need to start a podcast. And I'm so tired at this moment. And I think my first thought was like, are you serious? Like what? A podcast? Like now podcasts were popular at the time. This was almost 3 years ago. But they weren't like obviously what they are now. Pandemic kind of kicked. It's changed so much. Mm-hmm. But even then I was like, being in PR and marketing, I'm like, that's a lot of work. Like I knew it was going to be, right. And at the time I was not in a field like you are, or a lot of practitioners out there where I had a business related to psychic abilities, intuition, spirituality, what have you. Like, again, I was full-time corporate. And so as I'm falling asleep and I get this message, I'm like, all right, now what does that mean? What do I do? And being in communications, my guides and angels just started visually showing me, all right, you need a website. This is what it's going to be called. Here's who, you need to start to reach out and all these things. And again, I'm like, okay, this is awesome. I finally got the answer. But at the same time, I was in such fear mode because then I'm like, what does that mean? Like I have to actually step out of that psychic closet and like broadcast it out there. And I'm not saying it's for everybody, but there's just a level of fear. And so I just put a pin in it and I said, I'm going to go to sleep. And I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove to you, spirit and universe and everybody else, like that I don't need a podcast. I don't
You're wrong
need to be
about
out
me.
there.
I'm going to stay in corporate and everything's fine.
Yeah. And I'm going to stay miserable and in my little psychic closet. And I'm not going to listen to you, even though I've been praying for all these signs.
Were you in the vein that I have fallen into where I'm like, no, I'm just going to manifest my way out of this. I'm going to keep going this path, but I'm going to get really focused in my manifestation.
Yes.
I'm going to align with it and I'm going to do exactly what I want, like totally ignoring what my higher self is telling me.
That, and also I think that, yeah, I mean, all of it, the manifestation thing, a lot of times that's a great question too. I was told early on that if you don't like your path and you don't necessarily even like the answer, you can manifest and do all the things. You can be like, I don't want this. I do want this. And I think we even talked a little bit about that when you were on, what that looks like and how it shows up. And so, yes. So I get a restless sleep. I'm like tossing, turning, that sort of thing. Wake up in the morning and I'm like, surely there is something out there where it's branded, it's copyrighted, all these things. And it wasn't. And I just went into like call to action mode and started to do all these things. At the same time, I was very much still fear-based up. It's not that my friends and family didn't necessarily know what it was that I do in my free time and in my personal time, but I was wondering, am I going to still have clients? Is my company going to fire me? Are people going to think like I'm even crazier than usual? Like all of the doubt, all the fear. And then going into, and I'd love to hear from you too, but that was exactly like the work that actually goes into it to do all the things, the website, then the distribution and the content and the editing and everything. So it was very much a process.
I'm really glad that I didn't know how much work was going into it. And actually, I can say that for going back to even when I started my business, when I like really said, yes, I'm going to go on this path. I'm going to leave my nursing career. I'm going to get trained in this thing called EFT. Nobody knows what it is. But when I made that decision, if I had known everything I was going to have to work through and how freaking hard it was going to be, fulfilling and rewarding and like an amazing journey. So absolutely worth it. But like, I'm really glad that I wasn't given all that information because I think I would have been like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing that. That is a lot. Right.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think too, that the biggest, I don't know how I say this for your listeners, the biggest message that I got at that point was, I like to say that my guides and angels give me breadcrumbs. They knew, okay, you have been praying, you have been asking for a sign. And also we know a little itty bitty baby sign is not going to get you into action. So they gave me at least enough to know the steps I should take and how to take them. But they also didn't show me everything else that spirit and universe has planned. I still see, like when I try and look into my future, a curtain. There's certain things and them smiling and they're like, yeah, you're not ready yet because of the things that you're talking about, right? Like if they were to show me everything, I wouldn't necessarily do it. But
I totally agree. And like maybe we'd put too much pressure on ourselves and it would mess things up somehow.
Well, I think it's that.
More resistance, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's that. But then also too, like, I think at least for me, my ego gets a little bit in the way, or that fear of success or rejection, and maybe less now than it was then. But also just too, I don't have the foresight. I'd like to think I do, but I don't have the foresight to say like, okay, actually now I see where you're going. Like, for example, if you had told my younger self and tried to explain what social media was and what podcasting is and all of the things, I wouldn't have actually taken the steps to the path that I'm on now. Right. So it's like a little bit of, they give us a little bit of unveiling the curtain to kind of help us move forward, but not sharing too much. Right.
I totally agree. And I feel like I've come back to that lesson time and time again. And sometimes I have gotten big information and I find myself be like, and I do, my ego gets in the way and I'm kind of like, oh crap, how am I going to make that happen? And then I have to go back to the process of surrendering and trusting that they're going to give me everything I need. I'm going to keep following those breadcrumbs. I use that same phrase all the time. And I'm going to end up exactly where I need to go. But I think you're exactly right. Like there is a reason that they don't go. And this is all what it's going to look like, you know, plus it would take the fun out of it in the process of trying to figure out how this all works.
Yeah, there's that. And I also think that too, when I look back, it's really our higher selves, right? Yes, it's like the universe, it's our guides and angels, it's all of that are like helping to direct us and guide us, but it really is our plan. Like our individual plan and the direction that we want to go from a soul growth perspective and what that looks like. So while I look at the master plan that the universe has unfolded for me and for you and others, it's also like the same thing. Like I have to kind of laugh at it that I signed up for this. and that I
Right.
kind of created and manifested it. Right. And it's now me just like kind of taking the bull by the horns and leading through and leading that purpose and what that looks like. But man, if you had told me as a little kid, well, actually, no, I lie. If you told me when I was like 3 or 4, like, this is what you're going to do, I'd probably been like, oh yeah, sure. If you had told me when I was maybe 10, I'd be like, are you sure about that? But that's part of the human
Funny that
experience.
You mentioned that, because I have done so much inner child work, as I know you have too. And as I was working through this fear, it was the first time in my life I went back to like the little girl that was like 3 or 4. And she was like, I'm good. It's that one over there that's freaking out. And it was definitely more like 11, 12, 13, like those preteen years, that taking this next big step of, doing the podcast and doing the transitions that I'm doing in my business and putting together more group work. It was the teenage version of me that had way more fear and was kind of like, like can't really see it and is kind of freaking out inside. So going back to that, you mentioned the fear and coming out of the spiritual closet. I love that conversation, because I know there's people that are going to be listening that are so into this that would probably listen to every episode on your podcast, or both of them, and probably never tell a soul, and or maybe fine. Like one or two people that they know, like, okay, I can trust with this stuff, but like, it's really scary. So how did that fear show up for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I have a little bit of a different experience as far as how spirit and just how my abilities, I call them abilities and gifts, whatever definition you want to kind of put on it. But my perspective is we all have them. We don't it's not just intuition, and it's not just a sense of knowing. Like, we all have psychic abilities, intuitive abilities, what we would call supernatural, right? We call them supernatural because it's just not yet defined. We don't necessarily understand it. So I say all that because when I was born and I was growing up, I just thought everybody had the kind of information that I was receiving and getting and everything else. And tell my birth story in a little bit, but before I get into that, because it's a little bit weird, or like I say, woo-woo.
I can't wait.
Yeah. But so from that whole perspective, like, as I was like, even I remember when I was 1, 2, like a very vivid memories, which a lot of people don't necessarily have when they're younger. And, usually when you're about 5 or older, that's when your first memories start kicking in. So I just had this, and I'm trying to say this in a humble way, like this kind of sense of wisdom. And so as I started to get more with my words and choosing how to show up and communicate with other people, I realized what I'm sensing and experiencing isn't the same thing that they're sensing and experiencing. And that was still very much a part of me until, again, I got maybe into like 10, 11, 12 and into my teen years, because then I realized I had to dim that light, or I felt like I didn't do it. I did it intentionally because I felt like if I were to show up the way I was, because no one else, at least they weren't showing up in that way or coming out of that closet and being open about it, then I felt like I just had to dim it. So there was that. And then over time, as I started to get into like the adult world in college and getting a career and everything else, and especially being in PR and marketing, where it's your brand and how you show up in the world is very important. And it's almost like a little bit fake it until you make it kind of thing. I was like, this is my specialty. And I think that was part too of why when I was older in my career, I started to feel so icky about it. Not because what I do is a bad thing. It's just that there's an authenticity to it. And you can tell a narrative and you can tell, quote unquote, your messaging and your truth, but is it really the heart of who you are? And that's where I felt like that for me was a turning point and a pivot in my life, where I was like, I can't honestly show up and be who I truly am to everyone in my life, clients on the corporate side, spiritual clients, and or my friends and family. I can't have multiple selves. I can't.
It sounds like you were kind of living 2 different lives and like compartmentalizing them instead of integrating. Yeah.
And think about that. Like, it's not like I would walk into a boardroom and be like, okay, this is where I'm seeing your earnings going. Like, I wasn't like, the psychic in that aspect, or the feng shui, expert in that aspect, or anything else like that. But at the end of the day, like, in a way, I was kind of like, I feel like we should be approaching it this way, and we should go about things this way. And this is really what I'm hearing you say. So it showed up naturally just in my communication experiences, but I wasn't necessarily getting the heart to how I would know that information. And a lot of clients, again, on the corporate side, was like, I just don't understand how you knew that, or you predicted that, or everything else. And I'm just like kind of smiling like, well, I do, but and then at that point it was like, you got to rip off the Band-Aid. You got to do that. And so when the podcast idea kind of popped in my head and it was downloaded by Universe, I thought to myself, okay, oof, that's a big one. And then that's when the fear really kicked in because of the separation. Right. And, it wasn't so bad. I would say that and I'd love to hear from your perspective. I know it's still
My
early
period has
on.
been unbelievable. Like my throat's closing. I can't barely talk. I'm dizzy. I feel like I'm going to throw up. I mean, I'm doing better now, but yeah, it was so visceral.
Well, for me, the way I got away from it or around it was I was like, I'm not going to pay for advertising. I'm not going to promote it and do any sort of quote unquote PR. I'm not going to tell anybody about it, literally, other than like my mom and my sister and my grandma and whatever. And then if people find me, they find me. It's kind of like that saying of if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it fall, like, did it really make a sound? Well, it does make a sound, people. All right. There's an energy. It makes a sound. It makes a huge impact. It makes a huge ripple. And that's what happened. And so, but I will say, like, even to this day, even maybe 3 weeks ago, I was with a client and they said to me, they're like, I went to an event and I told them I was taking time off to go to this event. And this event was in the spiritual community, not in my PR marketing. And they're like, wow, you're really putting yourself out there, aren't you? And they just kind of gave me this look, not a judgment, but just like a going for it. And I was like, but I have to. Like, just who I am now. So hopefully that helps you and also helps your listeners, because I feel like however, and it's not for everybody. You don't have to always rip off the Band-Aid, like, and do what Kelly's doing and I'm doing.
Right.
I feel like when you hear that soul call, or you hear that call from your spirit and the universe about what you want to do, then there is a level of responsibility that you need to take that step forward and honor it. And by the way, all we're doing is following that. And there's only one way, and that is actually success and up to help ourselves and help others. Spirit isn't going to let us fail.
Yeah. I just had an awesome conversation with a girlfriend of mine about this same thing, and how this is one of the places I feel like I did get manifestation wrong, because it was all like, keep your vibes high, which I totally believe in. But when it comes to putting yourself out there, or like breaking through the mold, as I say, and doing something really that far out of your comfort zone, there is going to be a layer of discomfort. And I think so many times we get close to that discomfort and we start to feel it, and then we misjudge it as like, oh, I was wrong. I'm not supposed to be doing this. It shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this painful. Where really, if we want to break through and go to the next level up mentally, physically, spiritually, and actually start following those things that our guides are saying, yeah, do it. It could hurt a little bit. It could be kind of scary. It doesn't mean it has to be. But that resistance is just more of a sign that, yeah, this is something that your soul really wants to work through, so that you're not afraid, that so you can find that courage and expand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say something really important too, is that this is what's been showing up for me, not just myself, but with people that come to me for sessions, is that any of those like lower vibrations are external, like fear, anxiety, stress, sadness. I mean, you're probably like, what do you mean that's like external of me? It really is. It's not inherently who we are from a soul level and on our resonance. Like, who we are is love and light, and what that looks like. And we're just separated from it a little bit. We're not connected, I guess I should say. And so when you say like that you're experiencing it and to move through it and it's uncomfortable, it's really just to embrace it and thank it for showing up and being in gratitude for that moment. And then the moment you are, then it's like, okay, then it gives you an opportunity of awareness and reflection to say, okay, why am I feeling that way? And you move through it faster. I did all the way up until I told you about the podcast and the praying and like, why am I so miserable? I did a lot of, I don't want to go there and even feel that about the why I'm feeling it, because then that was going to mean requiring a lot of big changes like this. Right. And I just wasn't there yet until I was.
Yeah. And then you're there, and then we start doing it.
And then it's something else.
And then we see these miraculous changes, and then our soul wants to grow again.
Exactly.
Again. Yeah. Nicole, would you tell us about your spiritual gifts and what that looks like for you?
Yeah. Well, actually, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back to like my birth story.
Absolutely,
and what that was like, because I think that'll give a little bit of context and background about, what happened to me. So I remember when I was really young, I was in bed. I want to say I was like 2 or 3. My dad was tucking me in, and he was telling me, he's like, we pick and choose our family and our friends and who we want to be with when we come into this world. Now, this is heavy stuff to talk about with a child at that age, but he was like way into it. Like, this is in the 70s.
I was going to say, he was obviously where, like, I would do that now, probably. I was just telling somebody that yesterday. I would have those conversations now with my little kids. I'd be like, what was that last life like? Where were you? What, do we know
he would ask me all that kind of stuff too, like later on. But yeah, I mean, this is one of my earliest memories. And I remember he was talking to me and I was like, and part of it, people would be like, well, he planted a seed and maybe this was creative imagination and everything else. But what was very interesting about the conversation, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was like, oh yeah, I know. And he was like, what do you mean, And and I think it's because our memories are so fresh when we come here. So when you're at a young age and, or as a parent, if you have children, this is the best time to like start to have the conversations with them because they don't forget so quickly. And I remember being on like the edge. It was like, I would call it space or like the galaxy. Cause it was like everywhere and nowhere. It was just like blackness and darkness, but I still felt very connected to source and there's light around. So they weren't just stars. They were like actually souls and other things and just like kind of floating, almost like fireflies. And I remember looking down and it was like literally like Earth. And it's like in a movie where like all of a sudden the clouds part and then you're zeroing in and you're going faster and faster down. And there's this little girl and she's playing on like this lawn and she had really curly, like auburn brown hair. And I remember, oh, she's going to be my mom. And and then this voice behind me was like, cause I went to step forward and go, and the voice behind me was like, no, it's not your time yet. And I remember getting like, kind of like, oh, man, I really want to go now. And so I was like, fine. And I went to turn around. And by the time I went to turn around, it was like a nanosecond. And then they said, okay, you're ready. And then I was just like heading down to earth. And as I'm going down, I remember being like actually like in the womb, and that's a whole nother story for another day, but like all of these things. And then when I was actually born and I was coming out, I remember the next thought I had was, and I, you can bleep this out if you need to, but I was like, holy shit, not this again. It was just this massive, like everything came crushing, the heaviness, the weight, the physical aspect of no longer being just a soul and pure source energy. And so like, then I'm here and I remember looking around the room, like, and at the doctors and everything else. And I just have very vivid early memories of me being born and then growing up. So it was such a gift. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier in the episode where when we were talking, where I'm like, I just thought everybody had these memories and you know what I mean? And so that was one of my first realizations when my dad said that. And he's like, what do you mean? Tell me more. And then I told him, and then of course, then I'd go to bed. And then the next, my mom's like, so your dad said that you guys had a conversation and what was that like? And I was just like matter of fact and whatever. So that is, I guess, when you say, or you ask me, like, what are your abilities? What are your gifts? Again, everybody has them. I just think because I wasn't disconnected from them so early on, and because my parents encouraged me and helped me, nurture it, I guess, I didn't really lose a lot of that. So for me, it's almost like breathing. I just have a sense of knowing and having information, and it has always really guided me. So that's the first thing. The other thing I have very strongly, which most people would say it's imagination or it's creativity and like daydreaming, is that from my mind's eye, I can see things very clearly. So when somebody's asking me a question and we're just having a general conversation or whatever, it's almost like movie pictures like pop in my head. Mm-hmm. And then if I need further clarification, my higher self or my guides and angels actually will give me messages verbatim or sentences. And it's almost like I'm reading a script and I can see it visually. Occasionally I will actually hear voices. Like in the case of, I liken it to, I've only heard it 3 times. One before I was born and I came and they said, not your time yet. 2, another time, which I tell the story on my podcast about what happened. And my sister was almost abducted. And then 3 was like another situation where it just like came in, but it comes through very clearly when there's instances that there needs to be an intervention. Like I'm going to take an action and spirit's like, no, like absolutely. And I'm not listening. Yeah. And I would say, but really there's all of them, but the strongest ones are the mind's eye and the vision. And then the being able to, the auditory hearing.
Oh, that's incredible. So as we're talking, are you getting anything just as we're having a conversation? Are you getting anything downloading?
Oh, I get things all the time. And that's why it's really hard. I had another guest one time and she was like, do you have really bad ADHD? And I was like, it's not the ADHD most people think of. It's like my spirit. Yeah. I call it my spiritual ADHD because I get things all the time, like happening and conversing with me. And I have to be like, okay, put a pin in that or like, hold on. And then also when I'm not looking like even at you right now, it's like, because I'm getting information kind of in, but I just put guardrails up.
Yeah. But yeah, I have to tell you how crazy it is that you just mentioned that, because I spent all last week reading a book about ADD and ADHD, a very medically sound, scientific, psychology-backed, huge book. And I did all this writing on looking at the overlaps between people with spiritual gifts, which I agree, I think everybody has them. So, but I would say the people that are maybe more spiritually inclined, more empath, more intuitive, just more intense, I guess. And I do think that we can all hone those skills, but also there's some of us that come in a little more like fresh and less of those guardrails, I guess. But I've been looking at this overlap between the symptoms of ADD and ADHD, the symptoms of trauma, and the struggles that intuitives have. And it's like, it's insane how much of those things overlap. It's crazy.
You're going to have to walk me through that. You're going to have to walk me through that later.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing a ton of writing about it.
Because I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, because it's like when we go into those upper chakras, and we're more in our right brain and we're in that intuitive space, it's not a very linear space. Mm-hmm. Right. So we can't keep track of time very well. Things are kind of disorganized. I talked to Brittany Buckwalter last week and I was like, hey, what do you think about this? Of all the intuitives that do you think most of them have some kind of ADD thing? And she was like, 100%. So sometimes I'm looking at it through the lens of, obviously there's a struggle there. Mm-hmm. So whether it's intuition or a dysregulated nervous system or both, right? I think a lot of times it's both. There's a struggle there, but there's the gifts on the other side. And we get kind of locked into the disorder side of it, but there's all these gifts and, things that I think if they could recognize, like, yes, I have trouble like getting X, Y, and Z done in a linear fashion. However, I'm seeing things through my mind's eye and there's actually really important and very cool information that I'm getting that maybe not everybody does. So I don't know, it's just funny that you brought that up because I've been deeply in thought about that whole thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that, for me, thank goodness, in a lot of ways, I didn't have, or there weren't some of those diagnoses when I was younger and growing up. I'm not saying they didn't exist, but they didn't exist as far as like, so strongly, like somebody's like, oh, you're distracted as a kid or as a child, like you have ADD or ADHD, and then here's a medicine, or here's, again, I'm not saying against medication or even therapy for it, but I think that we don't do enough in terms of a holistic or medical community to say, okay, well, why and where is that coming from? Because it could be a combination of all those things or more. And if I had been, I probably would have drowned out certain senses. I would have drowned out certain emotions and things that wouldn't necessarily have allowed me to experience things that way. Right. And it's also difficult now today's day and age with Netflix and other things that you're just streaming in the distractions. Cause like we want to disconnect and we want to zone out and tune out and stuff like that. But as a whole, I think the biggest thing and the message that, I'm getting downloaded right now is just, spirit really wants us to be present in those moments. And then going back to the fear and some of that maybe anxiety and some things that we have when we go into uncomfortable things, uncomfortable moments or changes we need to make in our life, is just remembering that at that moment, while it feels it's insurmountable or it feels like it's super difficult, it's really truly a matter of just being in recognition, being aware of that, letting it move through you and understanding, okay, it's okay that I'm feeling this way. Now what? Because if I had done that early on in my life, so much more heartache I would have avoided for myself. Right.
Unfortunately, we're kind of taught to just push and they didn't know any better. We didn't do it that way back in the day. And we push it to the side, push it down, don't acknowledge it, try to work around it. Yeah. And it just makes it so much more uncomfortable rather than, as you're describing, the kind of like, okay, there it is. I'm going to breathe into it and acknowledge it, see what I need to learn here, let the fear move through me. And I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Going to be okay. Fear is just part of the experience here. Do you use tapping at all? I'm just curious.
Oh yeah. Well, I think when you were on, we talked about this a little bit. Speaking of when I was in, I would call one of my dark nights of the soul and I was praying to spirit and everything. And I just had such a sense of overwhelming stress and anxiety. And again, not knowing what to do about it other than just to be in fear, be in that anxiety state. I used tapping and I went to it so often. And that's what made me fall in love with it because I was and by the way, I probably at one point want to get certified in this, but let me just add it to my list of to everything else that I'm doing. But I found it so helpful because in just a few minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, that sort of thing, I was able to just get in that deeper state of calmness because what I finally learned about it, and I know you know this, but for me, it was just interesting to see you have your brain and you have these senses and the things that got you to where you were. And we evolved as human beings to survive. right?
Mhm.
And we sense in our brains and our minds can't distinguish reality versus just imagination and or wherever these things are going. And so if you think and perceive that there's a stressor out there and it's like, it's not a lion's going to attack you, or you know what I mean? Like it could be something
Yes.
super simple, but you feel physically and mentally and emotionally that like there's a lion out to attack you and you're going to die. And
Yes.
in using the tapping, I just was like so amazed in just again, not even 5 minutes, 3 minutes, how much more peaceful and calm I could feel with it.
Yeah, I think that I sometimes can be, I don't know, frustrated is not the right word, but sometimes I think that very deeply spiritual people can kind of poo-poo tapping without trying it. Um, and like it seems a little bit juvenile or trivial or something, or they don't need it because they're, so spiritual. But yeah, I think that just that little bit of communication with our body puts us right back in the present moment. And I feel like a lot of, especially for the intuitives and the highly sensitive, a lot of that fear that feels irrational comes from past lives. And the tapping somehow brings us back in the present moment so that all that baggage from this life and other is just like over here. So I'm glad that you have the same experience with it. I'm absolutely obsessed with that.
Yeah.
And
Well, when you were talking, speaking of, am I getting any messages? What I was getting downloaded is like, universe is saying like, we forget that our body is a container. But we're, and in a lot of ways, you could be like, well, am I trapped? No, it's not that. But because we're spiritual, we're energy and everything else. When we come into this body, we just tend to use it as like a container and a vessel, right? We forget that it's really actually the connective tissue, literally and figuratively, between our soul energy and our spirit, and then how we're showing up on this physical plane in this life. And so it's like the buffer, it's that barrier in between. So what tapping allows you to do, or really any sort of physical activity, but that allows you to get into your sensory perspective and perception, and really, like you said, back into the present moment, allows you to connect in a way that, yeah, you can do it through meditation, you can do it through breathing exercises and all of that, but you're actually physically using touch and sensory and your chakras and everything else that goes into it, the pinpoints, that allows you to connect back to that higher source. And I think that there's not enough, honestly, like information out there for people about how it works so much. Think about like acupuncture, right? And like Reiki and all those other things. Tapping's just another way. What is it called? Because I'm blanking on the name of, like, when is it acupuncture or pressure points of tapping?
Acupressure.
Okay. Yeah. That's what it is. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. The same points that we use in acupuncture, just put some pressure and it sends energy through the points. But I think to your point, I think people forget that even though the physical body is denser, it's still energy. It's just moving at a slower rate. And so if we forget about it, we're forgetting to work with a lot of energy, even though it's not the broader perspective of us. We come here to enjoy this like one little pinpoint in time and space. And sometimes we forget about our poor bodies and what they do for us and help us move about the cabin, so to speak.
Exactly. I love that. I love that quote. Move about the cabin.
Yeah. I mean, and I always tell people too, when they're getting frustrated with their ego, I'm like, hey, listen, you want to have an ego. If you don't have an ego anymore, you're probably not in a physical body. We can transcend it for moments, but there is some ego-ness that we actually want to experience here, and to be aware of it is so important. But I don't truly believe, unless you're like up on a mountain in pure bliss, that people are walking around without egos.
Well, yeah. And the ego serves a purpose. I mean, listen, the ego gets a lot of bashing, right? Over the last several years in particular, like there's a reason why it exists. And it's also another mechanism to help us survive, but it also helps us create and perceive and live the lives that we are. And if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to grow spiritually and evolve as much as we actually are without it. Ego doesn't exist on the other side. So in addition to the physical self, there's the mental self, which is also the ego, and part of that aspect of our personality that allows us to play in the sandbox, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. I love the way you just said that. Oh my gosh, Nicole, this is so fun. I really feel like we could do this all day long. Let me look here and see if there's anything else. Oh, yeah, I did want to talk to you about manifestation a little bit more. We kind of got into this a little bit. What do you think is the most important thing that you've learned about your manifestation process?
Gosh, I think, well, two things. The first
Or
is I didn't,
as many as you want.
Yeah. The first is that I didn't realize I was manifesting so much that I actually was. And I think that was just again, early on in life, it's not that somebody said this is manifestation and this is what happens to it. It's just like what I would think would happen, meaning thinking of something in a negative light, it would happen and it would manifest it. Thinking something is like a huge goal that's unattainable. And then people are like, how did that happen? You manifested it. And I was like, whatever. So it wasn't until probably in my 30s where I was like, I need to look into something, which probably feels like, well, if you remember being born, what do you mean you didn't look into it in your 30s as much? It was because it was a matter of time. I needed to actually take that mental space to be like, okay, what is actual manifestation and what does it mean? And there's different thoughts and perspectives out there. But
Sure.
what I've been told from my guides and angels is that the most important aspect of manifestation is to really feeling that emotion of what you want to show up in life. A lot of times, again, being here in an egoic and or a physical body, I need this job, or I want this relationship, or I want abundance, or I need these sorts of things, right? So we want those things and we have a checklist. And so then we think, okay, that's actually what's going to make me feel fulfilled and all of these things. What spirit has been showing me in a lot of ways, not just for myself, but for other people, is to really get at the heart of it, is to take everything else and put it aside and to say, okay, how do I want to feel? How do I want to be and show up in my life? And that's a very distinct, and I'm getting chills as I'm saying that, which, is my guide's way of saying like,
I've
this
got
is confirmation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is really feeling it. So like I had a session with somebody the other day and I was like, so you say you want to be in a relationship and who's my next person? Again, put that aside. I was like, how have all of your past relationships made you feel? And she was like, not very good, not very happy, not like, I feel like I need to be in control and like all these things. Right. So I was like, so what do you want? And she's like, I want to be loved unconditionally. And I said, okay. So then we walk through the steps, right? Well, now get into that mindset and now get into that emotion. And what would you like? It's less about how the person looks, what kind of job they have, how they show up. If you meet them in this timeline, like standing on this street corner or through a friend, it's really about all of that. And until you actually are in that space, that vibratory state and that vibration of this is how I would like somebody to have me feel and vice versa, then you can't get to that manifestation level. That's really what it is at the heart.
That's after years and years and years of learning and reading and playing with the law of attraction. And I've boiled it down to the same thing. My guides tell me the same thing, that it's more than the thought. Cause I think the problem is people think, oh, well, if I just think abundance, if I just say my affirmations. Now I do believe that that's important and it plays a role in our energy. But that's the key, is that if we say things or if we think things and we don't feel anything with it, then it just falls flat. And I do a process exactly like you described with every client that comes in. And I say, we go through a huge questionnaire of like, okay, what are the things not working? What's glitchy? What do you want to feel instead? And sometimes that is the hardest question for them, because we're so used to being like, well, I know what I don't want. And I have to get in a place of, what do you want to feel? If somebody talks to you in this way, how do you feel? How do you get to feel inside? What is, and it's a really fun process, because I feel like for a lot of people, they've never really, they've never worked with their emotions in that way. But I think,
well, and the other thing that I think is really important there too, that you said, is it's like, we think we want a certain thing, right? Mm-hmm. So what allows us when we go through that exercise, and I'm sure you do this with your clients too, is what I like to do is actually tap into their energy first and say, okay, this is what you called me for. This is what you really want to achieve. This is your objective. And I don't tell them really what I'm kind of reading at the front end in some cases, because what happens is they'd be like, yep, I want to get married, or yes, I want this career or this. And then it's getting into the feeling. And if you're out there and you're listening and you're struggling with being like, well, I don't know how it makes me feel. You probably actually don't want it.
It's a good point.
In some cases. Now, in some cases it is like, you need to get a little bit, you need some help and some guidance into getting there. But also it's like, just because you think you want something in the heart, then when you really boil down to it and you get into it, a lot of times you can't manifest that emotion or that feeling, because maybe that's not what you want on a soul level. So there's also some work that goes into that. So sometimes we try and manifest things, again, the external, as far as what we think are going to make us happy and feel that way. That's why it's so important to get centered in how you want to, like, to really be thinking and feeling how you want to feel about that. So I want to feel peace and calmness, or respect, or love, or gratitude, or whatever it is. And then you work out from there as far as what the potential outcome is, right?
Yes, I totally agree. And that kind of brings me back to, I've been going through this myself, because even though I'm like talking the talk to all my clients and I'm like, you got to feel it now so you can manifest it and you'll find your alignment,
sister, I know.
right? Like all the things.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, I'm going through like the same steps over and over and over again that are draining the shit out of me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm going to my coach and I'm trying to tap out the draining feeling, right? Which does work sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this is exactly what I realized. What you just said was that I finally got to a point where I was like, I'm being drained because I'm not in alignment with that anymore, and it's not fulfilling. It's just not clicking. It's not aligning with what my soul wants to move and do. And so where it once was, it was very fulfilling. There are these certain things that I finally had to realize I'm not going to tap out the density. I'm not going to tap out the heaviness. I'm not going to tap out. And I really thought I could, you know what I mean? I was like, oh, I've just got something inside here that I got to get, I got to get this moved out. I got to get this resolved. The thing that I needed to resolve was that I was being led in a different direction to do things like this and have these conversations, because they are so energetically giving and so exciting and fun for me. And I want to manifest more of those feelings. So,
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Like how energizing it can be. It's like, it can be a lot of the work, but it fills you up so much.
It's night and day. It is night and day. And I tell people that all the time. You'll feel it. When you feel something that zing lights you up, pay attention. Even if it's the tiniest little thing. If you wrote a note on a Post-it note and you felt that bump of energy, there is something so important. And your guides are like, yay.
Yeah, I know. They're cheering you like, yay, you're listening. Yeah. Do more. Yeah.
Totally. And I feel like that every step of the way, because, again, my ego wants to come in and be like, I can't see the path exactly. I don't know why I'm doing this podcast. And I would get very heady about it. And like, other people are doing it. I don't need to do it. Maybe that's attention seeking, like all the ego questions. And at the end of the day, once I started doing it, I was like, oh man, this is like crack. There's so much energy behind this. I've got to pay attention to it. And I don't
own it.
Yeah.
And you own it. That's the other thing. There's something so important right now in a day and age. This is another kind of message I got before we got on here. Yeah. There's so much importance in this day and age where our lives are controlled by external factors. And whether it's the internet, it's, streaming services, what have you, or jobs, other things. This is something as a healer and a light worker. And this is a message for you from your guides and angels as a light worker and a healer, that you have a platform that then it's yours. Like it's your gift. It's how you're showing up in the world. It's you being able to, and I'm getting huge chills saying that, like your empowerment. It's not like an ego thing. It's not like, oh yeah. Cause I feel the same way. Like when, my guides and angels, like you need to do sessions. And I was like, there are so many practices. I don't need to do, I don't need to do that. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to fight you guys anymore. I'm just going to so the point is that yes, if they're not showing you everything or you don't know, like, again, kudos to you for taking those steps, because it's a brave step, but it's also a step that we don't need to have all the answers, as long as, the universe has our backs and it's moving in the direction, because you are sharing your gift and you're creating a platform that's powerful, that then that energy is connected and it's connecting all of us. That's really what it is, right?
Yeah. And that's really exciting. And I totally had chills the whole time you were saying that. And I think that there are people like you and I who our soul is desiring to express through these channels. And like you said earlier, not everybody's will, but it will be something different. And I know that I personally have been in battle with that for a long time, like just beating myself into submission. I don't need that, and oh my gosh, it is so life-changing to set that free. Or to set it free in layers. I'm sure I'm not done.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. I was going to say, you have more to do, but at least then you're being rewarded in a way that, like you said, it's lighting you up. It's that passion. It's that spark that then the rest of it comes and follows, versus you having to like force create it. Right.
Yeah. And learning to trust and manifesting with my higher self and not trying to work against it.
Yeah, I know. It's hard. It's hard when when they're not giving you the full picture, although at the end of the day, that it's the right steps to take or the steps that you need to take. It still doesn't necessarily make it any easier, but sure, man, it makes it exciting, right?
Yeah, I'm like real sassy with my guides too. I feel like
Yeah.
they're sassy
Tell
back
me
though.
behind the scene. Okay, so what's like a conversation with them like? What's a sassy combo with Kelly and her guides
So I
like?
mean, as you were describing earlier, when you were like, I'm going to prove the universe
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I don't need to do this, you know, like kind of that same thing where I'll get a message to do something and I'll be like, you've got to be fucking kidding me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like,
Exactly. Yeah.
seriously, you guys, come on, really? And they're like, yes, Kelly. And they're laughing the whole time. You know, we have a very
Mhm.
playful relationship. And that was a fun thing that was validated recently when I had a reading with somebody. And she was like, this guide is really funny. Like he like messes with you. And I was like, yes, this is exactly how that relationship plays. And she's like, he's definitely more of a masculine energy. And I'm like, yep. Like she described exactly the way I connect with
Your
him. So
interaction. That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. So that
Don't
was
you?
kind of
You gotta
fun.
love it. Yeah, I could see that yours are sassy. You know, they reflect and mimic and mirror a little bit of our personalities too. You
They're
know,
playful, you
they
know.
are.
I mean, I think we have a sense of humor with each other. Like this
You have
is,
to, otherwise you
yeah,
won't survive.
exactly. You have to. Okay, so I want to go back one more time
Sure.
to you start doing the podcast and you put it out there, but you're like still not really telling anybody about it. And you're
Mhm.
still doing your corporate job.
Mhm.
Was there anything else in there that like kind of started to integrate it? Like, do the people that you work with now know about your
Oh
podcast?
yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's on my Insta. So I have two Instagram handles. One's my personal, which is my name. And then the other is a psychic story. And it's almost, speaking of sassy guides and our interactions is that they were like, you can't have a podcast out there and now talk about it on one hand and not, you know, also share it on the other. So I was like, okay, fine. So I put like the link on there. And it's funny because the people that don't really want to know don't bring it up. Like they see it or they'll,
Uh-huh.
you know, I'll say I have a podcast and this is what it's called and everything else. But at the end of the day, like the ones that want to know more, they reach out and they ask, and or there's conversations, and others that maybe more on the religious side that aren't, you know, necessarily as into it. And there's a level of respect, but I will say it was like, so the first thing was, yes, like I'm going to get the website and the handle and like start to create, what does this look like? And you get your hit list of guests and you're going through the process. So you know what it's like. And then as I'm building it and I'm putting it out there, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put it on the shelf or like, let it just be simmer on the stove for a little bit. Don't need to go back to it anytime.
Mhm.
And then pretty soon thereafter, it's like, you know, people reaching out to me, everything else that's on that one side, but then also on the corporate side of things, people are like, so tell me more about this. What's this like? And I think I thought in my head that like my world was going to crumble, like that there was, and maybe that was also lying to, it's not that I'm a very important person. It's just that in my mind, I look very polished and professional on one hand. And I thought that then the people that looked at me professionally and all of that would then be like, well, what are you like reading tarot cards and wearing a muumuu and looking into crystal balls on the other? And by the way, even if I did, who cares? But that's
Right.
part of, you know, so yes, there were some moments there very early on. Now, this is almost 3 years ago. So I have to like dig back deep. But for the most
Yeah.
part, it was like little pss, pss, pss. It wasn't like huge smoke, you know, and fires and everything else. It was very much in my mind what I thought was going to happen. A, didn't happen.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
B, like it was just my emotions and feeling in ego being like, this is what's going to happen and you're going to fail if you do all these things. So it was very much a nice letdown in a good way.
Yeah. In a perfect way.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, I feel like doing this podcast is partially part of the encouragement that I'm getting to do it is to heal my throat chakra because I've had
Mm-hmm.
so many lifetimes of
Your voice
issues,
being
my voice being, well, let's just
figuratively
say
and
it, my head
literally.
being cut off, being
Yeah,
strangled.
I got this. That's why I went like
Yeah.
this. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Like all of this over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again. Partially, I mean, so not even that. I'll just go back to, I think that I'm healing my throat chakra and sort of, you know, putting the self-expression out there in a way that I'm learning to trust it again and get used to using my voice in that way. You have the most incredible vibration that comes out of your
You were so
voice.
sweet.
No, I've always ever since the first time I heard you talk, there is something truly magical about it. And so I wanted to ask, I mean, do you feel like you have throat chakra blocks? Because to me, it does not sound like it at all, but I'm curious.
No, I don't. I will say the blocks I was getting, because I'm glad you mentioned what you did about your experience and thank you for sharing that, is that there's a lot of us as light workers and healers. And when I say coming out of the psychic closet and I laugh about it, it's no laughing joke. Like there's some real fear there because
it's hardcore. Yeah. There's
when we were burned at the stake, when we were hung, when we were, tortured, all those things, like there are memories physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally that come up in this trauma for us that we're working through. I'm not saying that to be in victim mode. I'm just saying that like when you're feeling something, whether you're just starting to slightly dabble in this, and that's where you're like, where's this fear coming from? When you were like, I feel like I'm going to get burned at the stake, it's probably because you had an experience about that, right? Yeah. So I say that because that was, for me, it was more encompassing from that perspective. I literally felt like my life was going to end. But at the end of the day, when the solution and the answer came up that the only way you're going to step through that and not feeling like your life is going to end is when you're actually open and authentic about who you are. What a huge empowering moment that was, right? And it was less about the throat chakra and more honestly, like across my energetic being. I do have moments, absolutely, because A, I'm in PR and communication, so I talk all day long there. Yeah. B, with the podcast, and then C, with the sessions I do. Like there's a lot of talking and a lot of stuff. So I have to constantly kind of clear that out. But I think honestly, one of my gifts, if you were to go back to one of your earlier questions, is less on the spiritual and the psychic side of things, and more about like, that's where they're saying like your gift is to share your voice, not me just individually, but everybody out there listening and you. Sure. And so you working through that, I feel like for you, I'm looking off to the side because I'm just seeing your guides and angels. Like there's this huge light, like just this bursting of light through your throat. And they're saying like, there's a really small key of you just like unlocking it right now. It's almost like you're comfortable with keeping it right now.
No.
Well, you're comfortable with keeping it right now because it's been your safety blanket, or they're not saying safety blanket, they're saying security blanket for so long. Yeah. And that now this is like, it's going back to the Band-Aid kind of analogy, like you've already ripped it off. So I feel like it's obviously definitely like healing and everything else, but they're like, this is really the key. Like, you also need to know when you're going into this with each intention, like that you're not going to have that issue anymore with your throat chakra, like, cause it's in the past.
Yeah.
It's past healing. And I know I say this before, but like the timeline isn't linear and there really is no existence of time. So what you're actually healing is you're healing all of those quote unquote past lives and all those experiences in the here and now through this. And so, cause I'm seeing them, it just like, it's this light and then it's like exploding. So it's actually done. But the reason why you don't feel like it's done, as like a boom on my mic, it doesn't feel like it's done. Cause you're like, still, it's like a baby, like a safety, like you're just like, right?
Yes. It's still fresh.
It's still fresh. Yeah. And that's totally fine. And you don't have to force it, but that's why. So I know that was a long way of answering your question, but I just wanted to say that's why I don't necessarily get it in my throat and my voice as much because I felt it on all the other levels.
Yeah, no. And that's why I wanted to ask was because you don't sound like you have a chakra block at all. But it's funny because that's been my issue. I'm like, doesn't everybody have that issue? You know what I mean?
But it comes in waves. Like even earlier today, I was doing an interview with somebody for my podcast and I had to like hold it and I was like, and I wanted to clear my throat, not because allergies, in some cases it is, but yeah, this was a totally different level. So it does pop up, but it's more, I recognize that that's what's happening. And then I'm just like, okay, releasing. Yeah.
I truly do believe that by doing these steps and moving through this, like everything you described, I'm like, yes. And I think my guides have been telling me that for a long time, is that if I will put myself out there and do these things, that it will finally go, It's
not will, it is.
It is.
You used past or you used future state language when in reality, they're saying it's actually happening. It's already done.
Okay.
And so like, they're also saying like, do this. So like, I don't know if you use tapping, but like, if you actually do this and like, just
I do a lot of this.
Nope. They're saying like this. So your hands here and just taking some deep breaths in and out and then imagining like that golden light and then just expanding and then like breaking, almost like shattering, just like imagine that. And then now they're like using this, like up and out, like you're doing this, like they're like, it's not like beating it out of you. Like you do this. Yeah. It's like a kiss, like a friend, like a kiss, chef's kiss, like I'm out. It's yeah. Well, yeah, it's not Exorcist, but anyway, so it's already out of you. FYI. They're like, it's moving on. It's moving on.
Thank you. I love that visual.
There you go.
It is healed. Love it. Oh, all right. This has been super fun. Anything else that comes to mind that you're like, oh no, I know what I wanted to ask you, because you talk to all the people, all the intuitives, all
Yeah.
the people that are
Bring
tapped
it.
in.
What's the
What are the
question?
common messages? Are you getting any common messages about, what we're going through? Anything that comes to mind that would be helpful for people as we're navigating the world that's just
Yeah.
continuing to be in transition and turmoil?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the biggest one is that, and we've talked about it, is they really want to remind us. And this comes through like every morning when I wake up and every night when I'm going to sleep, they're like, just remind people, remind people. It feels really intense. It feels very heavy right now. And it is in a lot of ways. But also, we liken or think that there's all these external factors, these things that are going on in the world, and how do we control them, and what does that look like? And ultimately, at the end of the day, what they're saying is those external factors are truly of us, and they're external. They want us to know we're not ascending as much as we're actually descending, right? We think of our spiritual awakening and all this other thing of like, oh, our vibration and our vibratory state is going up. And then as things are happening in the world, like we're getting hold down and all of that. If you think about it, we're love and light and we're connected to source. And we've been incarnated and we're living here on earth. And what's happening is our consciousness and our awareness are actually kind of like melding, and they're coming to a point where because of that, we feel like we're struggling more. We feel like everything's much more dense. But what's happening is we're actually descending more than we're ascending, in a good way, right? Because that means the vibratory state and energy and everything else around us is starting to balance out. So the biggest message, and this has been the message for years now, and I'm sure you and others have been getting this too, is to really just be kind to ourselves and be in grace, and to hold that love and light. And if we truly reflect self-love to ourselves, and going back to the emotional state and everything else that we talked through, if we embrace that, then all is right in the world. But the moment we get in fear, or again, things that we can control, and, or, all right, what am I going to do about this and everything else? If we all focus on ourselves, we all just like are, how do I show up and what does that mean? And telling that authentic story and all of that, then there is peace. There is the calmness. We are raising our vibrations collectively, and we're there. And it's not going to take all of us. It actually is just going to take some of us to hold it. And that's really what I'm hearing a lot from.
It's beautiful. Is that going, how did you say it? Not going down?
Well, most people think we're ascending. Like if you, and it's a deep topic to end with, but it's an important, but it's an important,
I'm like, oh, tell me more.
Yeah. Well, and it's an important topic to like think of. And it kind of blew my mind when it first came, I say it first came to me, but it was downloaded to me, is that I always thought of, okay, our spiritual journey and our spiritual progress is like where it's a pendulum, or it's like this, like a stock market thing, and it's going up, right? And then at some point, somebody told me it's like a roller coaster, and really there's gray areas in between. But lately, the visual that I've been getting is that we think that we're ascending, and that as our consciousness is aware and we're raising our vibration and our vibratory state, that we're like ascending. And they're like, it's actually not that. We've always been with our higher selves and connected to our higher selves. What's happening is we're actually descending back, and our spiritual is connecting, that consciousness is connecting with that level of awareness with where our physical state is. That's why there's been so much struggle within ourselves.
Makes perfect sense to me, though.
Right?
It's almost like more of an integration of what was already there on both planes, but we're learning to live with this density and be highly conscious.
Correct.
Beings. Yeah.
Because most people think we're low, like we're low on the totem pole, and like we're raising. And it's also, think about it, it's egoic. If you're thinking about that, it's not that. It's like, it's an integration across the board.
And again, I think that's where sometimes people can forget about healing the energy of the body, the denser energies in the body. And I think what you described explains a lot of the somatic work, the tapping and EMDR and things, I think, because it's helping us to be like, okay, I am all of this. And oh my gosh, how powerful it can be, right? I am in all of it. And I'm not trying to get away from my body.
Right. I am. And that's the other thing. It's like our language and what God is. And you look into the history of everything, it's like truly like I am. And so when they said, or you're not ascending, you're descending, like as I'm falling asleep, I was like, what do you mean I'm descending? I'm like, I'm lowering my vibration. Don't you tell me. And then I was like, Oh, you mean like humanity is across the board. It's the integration. Like you have to think about it that way. Right. So
Yeah, I think 'cause, looking back for thousands of years, there's been so much trying to just like transcend that darkness and shame it away. And we're learning to do it in a new way. And that says like, I'm not going to hate or shame or all the things with the darkness, but I'm going to learn to integrate it and
we
love
have
it.
we have darkness in us, and it's okay. It is absolutely okay. We don't have to all be, the JCs of the universe and the world and everything else. And nor do I want that burden, or do I or others necessarily want that. Again, we're all going through our own experiences. But yeah, so when you ask, what is the biggest theme? And it was, again, breadcrumbs, like getting me to that point. And when they finally said that, I was like, oh, that's why it's so important about emotion. That's why it's so important about the awareness, the loving aspect of recognizing when that comes in. It's okay that you're going through it. How you heal and how you get through it is everybody's different, ways that they want to approach it, through, the tapping or through Reiki or whatever, or meditation.
Yeah.
That's why it's so powerful about it's not one size fits all for all of us. But yeah, that's the biggest thing, is to just recognize that everything going on in the world happens to be not of them, but of us. And the only thing we can control is ourselves.
Yeah. At the end of the day, that's it. We have to come back and just deal with ourselves.
And that's power. I mean, and also
power.
We don't want to deal with ourselves a lot of times.
Oh, I would rather tell someone else what to do.
Right. Exactly. Right.
That's actually not true. I'm just being funny.
I know what you mean.
But sometimes that's true. Yeah, for sure. Nicole, I think that is a beautiful, just really deep space to leave people to just kind of think on. And
if you want any more information, reach out to Kelly about that. No.
I'm sending your way.
Or vice versa. Yeah.
So speaking of, how can people find you?
So the best way to reach me is you go to my website, apsychicstory.com, and then all of the socials. It's all A Psychic Story. And that's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, TikTok, YouTube. I'm not really active on all of them really, other than Instagram, but you can reach me there. And and then if you have any, if you sign up for my newsletter, which is on there, and Kelly will share it in her show notes, you can be entered to win a free session with me.
Hey, you made it to the end. I want to thank you for being a part of the Manny Lab pod. It means the absolute world to me. Please consider heading over to Instagram and Facebook and liking and following so that you can stay up to date on all the content that's rolling out. Also, don't forget to follow on YouTube, the Manifestation Lab, so that you can see what we're doing with these meditations and this tapping thing. It helps to be able to see what we're doing. I'll see you in the next episode.